An unfamiliar ceiling, an unfamiliar room, unfamiliar sheets, and even pain. His body aches as though he had been beaten. He remembers everything up until a few cocktails at the welcome party. Senju is 20 years old and has lived an eventful life. The back he now sees belongs to Muhin. He wishes it would all turn out to be a dream. He cannot understand why he ended up alone with Muhin. They have been neighbors for as long as he can remember. His friend Merjan's older brother and an old acquaintance of his late sister. Muhin has a sly personality that often earned him rebukes from Senju's sister, and he's also 10 years older than Senju. Because of the teasing and constant mockery, Senju tried to avoid Muhin during his teenage years. He can't comprehend how things escalated to the point of them being together now. Senju wonders if he's dreaming and decides to go back to sleep. Suddenly, Muhin asks if he's awake. Muhin mentions that he spoke with Merjan. He says that Merjan invited them to have dinner at their parents' house. Senju notices that Muhin is holding his phone, which shows numerous missed calls from Merjan. He gets up and asks how Muhin could touch someone else's belongings. Even if he had woken up on the street, it wouldn't have been as mortifying as this. No, even if he had woken up in the home of a stranger he met yesterday, it wouldn't compare to waking up in the bed of his friend's older brother. It couldn't get worse. Muhin asks if he remembers anything. As if that weren't enough, Muhin turns out to be the one Senju has long been secretly in love with, unrequited. 3 months have passed since Senju's 20th birthday. Yes, this happened exactly 3 months later. Someone set the mountain ablaze and fled with the victim. The wrath of the heavens must be appeased. A phantom illness will strike anyone who commits such a heinous act. Thus, the So family was cursed, and future generations were haunted by malevolent spirits. Because of the sin of burning nature, the heavens turned away from the girl of the So bloodline, and their family tree began to wither. If necessary, she would sacrifice herself to protect her from the phantoms. The promise of a close friend became her solace. Lady Kim, gifted with the ability to see the phantoms haunting her friend, had an identical house built across the street as a decoy. Using her gift to expel evil spirits, she protected her friend until the end of her days. Even after her death, her legacy and will were passed down through generations, and to this day, the two families live side by side. Senju has known the family across the street for 20 years, and if he's learned one thing, it's this: ignorance is bliss. Sometimes it's better to remain in the dark. How did he end up here? What happened last night? Why does his back hurt? Perhaps it's better not to know. He says he might leave. Muhin tells him they should have breakfast first. He says he'll buy something delicious for Senju, insisting he needs to eat more. Unfortunately, ignorance cannot last forever. Muhin gives Senju a ride, and Senju thanks him, saying he'll be on his way. He also thanks Muhin for the meal. As they part, Muhin tells him not to drink too much tonight. Senju wonders how Muhin knows he was planning to drink tonight too. Muhin reminds him that he mentioned it yesterday. Senju thinks how foolish he must have been to say that and assures Muhin he doesn't drink that much every day. Senju reflects on how easily he can ramble nonsense but struggles to avoid making a mess of things. He feels uneasy somehow. When he touches the doorknob, he feels as if something strange lies beyond. As he enters the yard, everything seems unchanged. He wonders what it could have been. He decides it must have been his imagination. Merjan thinks that Muhin must have warned their parents since they said nothing to him. Usually, their parents worry both with reason and without. Muhin knows this and must have explained everything to them. Senju had been wondering what had happened for Muhin to answer from his phone. The cursed So family is known for its descendants rarely living past the age of 20 due to attacks from evil spirits. However, since Senju was born on an auspicious day, he managed to avoid that fate. For that reason, his parents and neighbors were always on edge. Something was always happening to Senju. He feared that this time they might have filed a missing person report. Merjan asks how Senju could drink so much he blacked out, telling him he needs to know his limits since he clearly can't handle alcohol. Senju replies that he doesn't drink like that every day. Merjan asks if he'll visit them today. Senju says he has a meeting with his classmates and will probably be back late. Merjan mentions that their dog, Peksolgi, is always waiting for him. He asks how his brother knew to pick him up. Senju says he doesn't know, and Merjan wonders why he didn't ask. Senju asks why he should ask, saying that everything turned out fine in the end. He isn't sure he wants to delve into the details of last night. He says he has to go and hangs up. Senju thinks how lucky he is that Merjan never asks too many questions. Senju bids farewell to the housekeeper and thinks that if he doesn't bring up the previous night, Muhin likely won't mention it either. He resolves to take this secret to his grave. At a meeting with friends, Senju can't stop thinking about last night. A friend asks why he looks so gloomy, and Senju replies that he's fine. The friend says it's obvious he's not fine, pointing out that he's been sighing all evening. The friend urges him to share, saying he can't help if he doesn't know what's wrong. Senju recalls waking up in his friend's older brother's bed this morning and remembers crying a lot last night. He admits he drank so much he blacked out. The friend asks if he made it home safely and wonders what could have gone wrong. Senju says he disgraced himself on the way home. The friend says he's curious how. Senju says he embarrassed himself in front of an old acquaintance but doesn't remember the details. He thinks that, strictly speaking, it wasn't entirely his fault. In situations like this, both are to blame. After all, Muhin saw he was drunk and still. Suddenly, Sojan arrives, apologizing for being late, and asks why Senju looks like he's dying. Senju explains that he drank so much he blacked out and embarrassed himself while drunk. Soyeon tells him that if there's ever a time to make mistakes, it's now, while he's 20. He advises him not to worry and suggests eating some meat instead. Senju thinks he wouldn't be so worried if this were just a one-time thing. On January 1st, when he had just turned 20, he experienced his first drunken kiss. It wasn't some childish kiss. It carried all his genuine feelings. And now it's happened again. His friends ask if he wants to join them, but Senju tells them to drink on their own. Socheon gets into a taxi and bids farewell until Monday. The guys tell her to be careful on her way home. Senju's friend suggests they go for a third drink. Senju asks why he'd need a third drink and says it's time to head home. Senju pushes his friend into a car, tells him not to stick his head out, and instructs the driver to leave. The friend says he'll wait for a call if Senju changes his mind. Senju wonders what kind of day this has been. He had to call home to inform them he was going for a walk. The atmosphere outside is dark, almost as if a ghost might appear. Though he knows he wouldn't see one, he lacks spiritual power. Suddenly, he notices a strange girl with black hair, barefoot, and dressed in white. Senju feels a creeping sense of fear. He thinks he just needs some sleep. His mind is playing tricks on him. He wants to hurry and get to bed as quickly as possible. The girl continues walking alongside him. She runs into the road in front of a bus, and Senju tries to stop her. He rushes onto the road to save her, and staring at the bus speeding toward him, wonders if this is how he'll die. But suddenly someone pulls him aside. Muhin is holding him in his arms and remarks that now he understands why he had a bad feeling. In that moment, Senju could only manage a nervous smile. Whether it was the unfamiliar embrace or the trembling that racked his weakened body, he couldn't tell. The girl continues to stand in the middle of the road. The next day, Senju attends university. He realizes he fell under the influence of a spirit. He tries to dismiss yesterday's events, but it's hard to forget an encounter with a ghost. He always thought he'd go his entire life without experiencing anything like this. But perhaps his bloodline has caught up with him. He pulls out a talisman Merjan gave him from his pocket. Ever since spending the night with Muhin, he's felt a strange energy and suspects he's facing serious problems. Suddenly, Sojeon approaches him and asks why he's lost in thought. Senju tells her she startled him. Sojeon replies that he startled her too and asks if he's gotten into trouble again. Senju tells her not to talk nonsense and says he's just a bit tired. She asks if he got home without any trouble on Saturday. That Saturday, Muhin mentioned that Senju might have developed spiritual vision. Spiritual vision, the ability to see spirits, is an extremely rare gift among ordinary people. It's astonishing that it manifested in him of all people. If one is born on an auspicious day but lacks even a drop of spiritual energy, there's no way they could ever see spirits. At least, that's what he used to believe. Muhin explained that it happened because his spiritual energy was transferred to Senju. At the time, Muhin reassured Senju, telling him that everything was fine. Though he still felt uneasy, the quiet whispers of Muhin helped him regain his composure. Not because Muhin's presence was calming, but because his low, sultry voice carried a suggestive undertone that was impossible to ignore. Muhin told him not to worry and that it was only temporary. Usually it fades within half a day. However, he added that in Senju's case, it might take a bit longer. He assured him that he would take full responsibility. Senju asked what kind of responsibility he was talking about. Muhin replied that if he couldn't retrieve his spiritual energy from Senju, he would have to protect him until his spiritual vision disappeared. He explained that they didn't want him to get into trouble again. Muhin approached the spirit and Senju asked what he was doing. He noticed talismans in Muhin's hands and wondered if he was about to exorcise the spirit. The talisman began to glow in Muhin's hands. Senju was utterly amazed. He had never seen anything like it before. Muhin told him to close his eyes and count to 100. Senju wondered if Muhin still thought of him as a child. In the heavy, oppressive silence, all of his senses became heightened. Despite the commanding tone, Senju resolved to keep his eyes shut until Muhin said it was over, understanding that the instruction wasn't given lightly. In truth, he didn't want to know what was unfolding before him. He heard a sound like gates opening. But where could gates possibly appear in the middle of the street? Suddenly, two mysterious spirits appeared, and Muhin greeted them, saying it had been a while. To Senju, it all seemed surreal. He wondered when it would finally be over and felt deeply unsettled by everything. The air grew colder. The two spirits and the girl vanished into the mist. Muhin asked if he had been very scared. Senju looked around and saw nothing. No girl, no gates, nothing at all. Muhin asked if there were any problems. Senju replied that everything was fine. Muhin told him to come with him, saying he'd give him a ride. Senju asked what he meant earlier when he said he'd take responsibility. He asked what would happen if another spirit appeared and they had to perform another ritual. He thought that meeting a spirit hadn't been the most pleasant experience. Muhin explained that spirits weren't actually all that rare. He asked if Senju was scared. Senju said no, just that it was tiring and drawn out. Muhin told him not to worry so much and promised to try not to appear in front of him too often. Senju thought about how confident Muhin was. He remembered how Merjan, because of his own gift, used to lose sleep as a child. Yet even among their family, Muhin stood out. Muhin revealed that he was an exorcist. In fact, he was a ghost hunter capable of banishing restless souls. At 20, he became an official member of the Exorcists Association and had been hunting spirits ever since. For the past 10 years, Muhin had traveled across the country. He asked Senju if he knew that spirits were drawn to spiritual energy, explaining that malicious spirits sometimes parasitize living beings or, driven mad, attack them. Even restless souls retain a fragment of their mind, and the spiritual energy of exorcists repels them. That's why, Muhin said, he would stay by Senju's side, so no spirit could come near him unless it wanted to be expelled from this world. Senju asked if that meant he might not encounter any spirits again. Muhin said that was highly likely. Senju realized that Muhin was not entirely certain. He never gave guarantees when there was even a slight chance, meaning Senju might meet another spirit again. Muhin reassured him, promising that nothing would harm him and urging him not to worry too much about it. Since childhood, everyone around Senju had been overly protective of him. Though he was used to it, excessive care could sometimes be irritating. He wondered if Muhin was doing this because of a family promise, a sense of duty, or, most likely, guilt. Suddenly, Muhin kissed Senju. Senju exclaimed, asking what kind of disgusting behavior this was. Muhin replied that he was being rather rude. Out of nowhere, Muhin asked if Senju had learned how to use a lighter. Senju wondered why he was even asking. Muhin said he hoped it would always be like this from now on. Senju wondered if Muhin was joking with him again. Muhin told him to go home, saying he'd pick him up on Monday. After their conversation, Senju finally realized what had weighed on him when the gates had opened. It had been the talisman suppressing spiritual energy. The cold he had felt came from Merjan's energy. This revelation made him realize how many things he had unknowingly been a part of. Things he might never have learned about otherwise. His friends asked if Senju really didn't want to drink with them and suggested going out for dinner. Senju said he wasn't going. They told him they'd treat him and that he wouldn't even have to pay. Senju declined again, asking them to go without him, as he was expecting someone. They suggested having shellfish this time, claiming to know a great place. Senju thought they weren't even listening to him and wondered why even the non-drinkers seemed so excited. Senju asked his friend not to lean on him, saying he reeked of cigarettes. His friend hugged him and told him to stop saying such things. Senju thought about how, with Muhin still expected to arrive, he couldn't imagine how to get rid of them. Suddenly, he overheard some girls talking about a handsome guy. He wondered if it was Muhin, but remembered Muhin had said he'd wait by the main gate. Surely there were other attractive people in the world. He desperately hoped it wasn't him. Senju had always felt that he strangely attracted attention, not because of his looks, but because of the unique atmosphere he created with his presence. He wondered how he could approach Muhin with everyone watching. If he could, he'd turn around and run. It wasn't so much embarrassment as the knowledge that whenever they were seen together, it caused a commotion. Not just for him, but for Merjan and Mujan as well. The trio's striking appearances and their history as neighbors had significantly impacted his daily life. Whenever he thought about it, his desire to show any familiarity with them disappeared. Maybe he should just quietly leave. Senju's friend asked why he was moving so slowly, saying their table was already reserved and threatening to go ahead and order without him. Suddenly, Senju and Muhin's eyes met, and they exchanged greetings. His friend asked if they knew each other, and if this was the person he'd embarrassed himself in front of last time. Senju said Muhin was just an acquaintance. Senju told his friend to shut up. Muhin watched them bicker and laughed. Senju thought this was an absolute disaster. He said goodbye to his friends and approached Muhin. Muhin asked if he wasn't planning to go somewhere with his friends. Senju told him not to wait by the university next time and that he'd call him instead. Senju explained it was because he didn't want to take up Muhin's precious time. He thought Muhin wouldn't wait for him if he wanted to hang out with friends. Muhin said he'd always make time to pick him up, but Senju replied that he should spend that time walking Peksolgi instead. Muhin remarked that, regardless, he shouldn't wait by the main gate anymore. Senju told him he didn't expect attention from someone so busy they only visited their parents 3 times a year. Suddenly, Muhin asked if Senju truly considered him just an acquaintance. Senju asked what else he should call him. Muhin suggested calling him a close neighbor Hyun. He asked if that wasn't accurate. Senju thought it wasn't accurate at all. He didn't even live next door anymore. He told Muhin they weren't that close. Muhin said it was a pity to hear that, considering he used to change Senju's diapers. Senju asked why he'd bring up something he couldn't even remember. Muhin stepped closer and asked if Senju still thought of him as just an acquaintance. After hearing those words, Senju would have preferred they remain strangers. What irritated him more was how he kept reacting to Muhin's words, knowing he was joking. Muhin asked if the smoker was his best friend, noting that he reeked of cigarettes. Senju wondered how Muhin could smell smoke from across the street and asked if he was even human. Muhin told him not to look so surprised and asked if he was friends with all those guys and girls. Senju said they were just classmates. Muhin joked that ever since they'd sent him off to university, girls had been flocking around him. Senju asked him to stop acting like his father. Senju quickly walked ahead, but Muhin told him to slow down, reminding him that they were supposed to walk side by side. Senju thought that if that were the case, Muhin shouldn't have said so much nonsense. Muhin asked if he planned to walk alone. Senju wondered how many more days this would continue. Once his spiritual vision closed, he'd no longer have the chance to walk alongside Muhin. Muhin would return to hunting spirits, and Senju would go back to his dull routine. The most overwhelming sense of loneliness can only arise from loving someone who does not return that love. In the end, he grew accustomed to his absence and gave up. He feels that something is off. Today, as he looks at the familiar scenery, he senses a certain oppressive unease. A sweet aroma drifts by. Is it coming from the forest? In an instant, the thick fragrance overwhelms him, and he feels an urge to rush toward it. His consciousness begins to drift slowly. He feels compelled to follow it into the forest. Muhin calls his name, but for a moment, Senju forgets his own name. Muhin asks what's wrong, pointing out that he suddenly froze in place. Senju wonders what that was, while Muhin asks if he's in any pain. Senju says everything is fine, he just caught a scent. For a moment, he felt as though he had lost control. He thinks maybe it was just his imagination. If something were truly wrong, Muhin, as an exorcist, would have noticed first. He tells himself it doesn't matter and isn't worth worrying about. He tells Muhin it was probably nothing and suggests they keep going. He concludes that he's just tired and really needs some sleep. Muhin asks if he's embarrassed to be around him. Senju explains that acquaintances keep pestering him to introduce them to Muhin. Muhin asks why he doesn't just introduce them. Senju asks if he's joking, adding that they're only 20 years old. Muhin replies that yes, perhaps 20 is too young. He then asks Senju if he'd like some cake. Today, they follow the same path as before. As they approach the mountain trail, the oppressive feeling returns, and he fears the strange scent might reappear. He's carried a talisman with him for over 2 years, but this is the first time he's relied on it so desperately. The closer they get to the trail, the stronger the sweet aroma becomes. He resolves not to fall for it again. That would definitely be cause for concern. And if Muhin truly starts to worry, he might begin waiting outside Senju's lecture hall instead of at the main gate, which would cause his friends to pester him all over again. He recalls Muhin saying that 20 is too young. Suddenly, Senju realizes he doesn't know where he is. Why, where, and for what reason is he walking? Suddenly, he sees a strange boar in the forest. For the first time, he distinctly feels the curse he's managed to escape until now creeping up on him. This time, he truly might lose his life. Muhin suddenly appears with a talisman in hand. Muhin tells him he's clever and reassures him that he's here. He tells Senju everything is fine and instructs him to simply close his eyes and count to 100. Spirits are the embodiment of nature itself, giving life to various creatures. A soul without a vessel, one that has not found peace or healing, is capable of accumulating anger and absorbing negative emotions, eventually harming other beings. Lost souls that remain stuck in this world for too long gradually lose their minds, their ability to think, and even their memories. When their reason fully abandons them, they become malevolent spirits. The energy of spirits accelerates this process. However, alongside the harmful entities, there are those capable of saving them. People who protect the living from interference by the other world are called exorcists. Their duty is to eradicate evil spirits. Among exorcists, some track spirits, while others seal them. Muhin belongs to the latter group of exorcists. Muhin carried an unconscious Senju home. Muhin simply told him to trust him. Senju found the insistence so compelling that he almost nodded in agreement. He asked Muhin if he was implying that he might encounter another spirit. Muhin said it was possible. Senju pointed out that Muhin had already sealed it. Muhin clarified that he had only sealed the boar. Senju wondered if that wasn't the end of it and worried there might be other spirits in the area. He hoped there weren't many. Muhin remarked that it seemed he had confused Senju. He admitted he couldn't be certain but suggested drawing an analogy. Senju was like a flower without a scent, but so valuable that everyone wanted to reach it. And if Senju was the flower, then spirits were the bees. Muhin explained that when his spiritual energy transferred to Senju, it brought with it a scent that wasn't there before. So, what would the bee do? Naturally, it would follow the flower. This meant that a whole swarm could gather around him. Senju wondered why it had to be him. Surely there were plenty of other flowers around. Then he thought, if they had known the exact answer, his brother and sister might not have died. Muhin likened spirits to Venus flytraps that lure their prey with their scent. He explained that very few exorcists could detect their energy. In Muhin's family, only he and his mother had this ability, which was why they hunted them. It was remarkable that Senju could sense the energy too, even from such a distance that Muhin himself hadn't felt it. Muhin said that typically it takes about 3 days for yin energy to strengthen, about the same amount of time the association needs to track spirits. He added that this gave him something to think about. He asked how Senju had managed to sense the spirit earlier. Muhin touched Senju's hand and asked if he felt anything. Senju noticed how cold his hands were, as though he were touching a talisman. Muhin said his hand temperature hadn't changed. He speculated that the reason was that Senju was an empty vessel. Normally, bodies are born with chi energy, but since Senju was born empty, he instinctively reached for external energy, making him acutely sensitive to spirits. Senju thought about how much time he'd spent with Merjan, but didn't recall anything like this happening. Muhin said it was still unusual and brought up the day Senju got drunk. Senju suggested they not talk about it now. Muhin speculated that Senju hadn't experienced this before because he had never absorbed so much energy. But as soon as his spiritual vision opened, his senses became sharper. Senju realized that he had a craving he hadn't been aware of and had unconsciously suppressed. He asked what he should do now. Muhin told him not to worry. Once his spiritual vision closed, everything would return to normal. Until then, he should stick close to Muhin. Muhin instructed him to inform him immediately if anything strange happened, even if it seemed insignificant, even if it just seemed like his imagination. Senju thought Muhin was scaring him, especially since the first time he smelled the scent, he hadn't thought much of it. It was difficult for him, and he didn't want to trouble anyone with trivial matters. But when it turned out to be something serious, it only caused more concern. He thought it was better to address such situations early, though things didn't always go as planned. He told Muhin he understood. Senju believed that the root of all his problems was alcohol and decided that he should quit drinking. Muhin asked if he should lend him some clothes, but Senju said he'd just go home. Muhin asked why and told him to stay. After all, the bed was big enough. Senju replied that he didn't sleep well outside his own home. Muhin pointed out that he didn't have any trouble sleeping last time. Senju thought, here he goes again, wishing Muhin would forget about it. He told Muhin he had university classes tomorrow. Suddenly, Muhin approached him from behind and asked how he felt about staying home for a few days. Senju said he didn't want to ruin his attendance record. Muhin asked if they didn't only give unsatisfactory grades after 4 absences. Senju retorted that it didn't mean he could just skip 3 days. Muhin admitted he didn't know much about it, having only finished school himself, and said his car was in the lot, offering to give him a ride. As they got into the car, Senju asked how he had ended up at Muhin's house. Muhin said he carried him on his back. Senju asked if Muhin had carried him all the way on foot. Muhin confirmed it and asked if he shouldn't have. Senju said, no. He just couldn't believe Muhin had carried him such a long distance and asked if it had been difficult. Muhin replied that it hadn't been. It was almost like when they were kids. He told Senju to rest if he was tired. Senju thought about how it was already dark. If exorcists worked at night, when did Muhin find time to sleep, considering he escorted him both mornings and evenings? Suddenly, Senju asked Muhin about his job. Muhin said he'd drop him off and head to the association. Senju asked when his spiritual energy would run out. Muhin said it would happen in about a week. Senju calculated that it was Tuesday, and skipping 3 days wouldn't hurt his overall attendance too much. He decided he'd stay home until the end of the week. He thought about how, on shorter class days, Muhin wouldn't even have a chance to sleep properly. Muhin suggested it would be better for Senju to rest at his place. Senju asked why. Wasn't his own home safe enough? Muhin said that in terms of safety, his home was unmatched in the entire country. Even exorcists found it breathtaking. He admitted he wanted to monitor Senju's physical condition. Although he had work tonight, he thought it would be best if Senju stayed with him until his spiritual energy ran out. Senju said he appreciated the concern, but assured him he was fine and didn't want to make his parents worry unnecessarily. Muhin said they didn't mind as long as Senju was with him. Muhin added that he had already spoken to them today and told them that Senju had fallen asleep after drinking. Senju wondered if he couldn't have come up with a better excuse. Muhin said if Senju was taking a break out of fear, so be it, but if he was doing it out of concern for him, then it wasn't necessary to sacrifice his attendance for his sake. He added that a few sleepless nights wouldn't kill him, so Senju shouldn't worry. Senju thought Muhin was far too clever. Muhin stepped out of the car and asked Senju what he had decided. Senju says that Muhin always does whatever he pleases. He adds that he's ridiculously persistent. Senju thinks that since Muhin said he could handle it, there's no point in arguing further. Outside his house, Senju thanks him for his help and for giving him a ride. Muhin tells him to take care and says they'll see each other tomorrow. It feels strange for Senju to hear such words from him. Muhin usually says something like, "All right, see you inside." For some reason, this fleeting goodbye touched something deep within him. Just hearing Muhin say goodbye differently caused his heart to tighten. The following days blurred together, passing without any major events. Each morning, Muhin drove him to university. Senju immersed himself in his studies but felt a fleeting irritation after class when Muhin kept waiting for him by the gates. Yet those identical days, walking side by side under the spring sun, became some of his most cherished memories. Monday. Senju feels nothing, no cold, no pressure from outside. His spiritual energy has faded. Senju wonders if he should tell Muhin not to come anymore. He thinks it's better to meet him one last time, just in case, and take the opportunity to thank him for everything he's done. Muhin wishes him a good weekend before disappearing from his life once more. There will be no more goodbyes that hint at future meetings. It's time to return to ordinary life. So what's the point in feeling disappointed now? During a lecture, the professor wraps up, wishing everyone a pleasant lunch. Senju's friend complains that he's starving and that Monday mornings are the hardest. On the way out, the friend suggests they eat at the cafeteria today, saying it's time to save some money. Another guy remarks that it might also be time for the friend to quit smoking. Suddenly, a guy from the business administration department named Fan Jun approaches Senju and asks for his number. Everyone around starts whispering about what just happened. Senju asks why he's creating an awkward situation and says he could have just asked Merjan for his number. Vanjon explains that he tried, but Merjan was asleep. Fanjan wonders aloud what Merjan was doing to still be asleep. Fanjan was a former classmate of Senju's, and like his neighbors, he plans to become an exorcist after graduation thanks to his abilities. However, as before, Vanjan talks more with Merjan than with Senju. So even though they're in the same university, they rarely speak. Senju gives him his number and asks why he needs it. Vanjan asks what time Senju's lectures end. Senju says around 3. Senju then says his own lectures end at 4 and asks Vanjan to wait for him. Senju asks why, and Vanjan says he'll walk him home. Senju asks why again, wondering since when they became friends. He points out that their homes are in completely different directions and asks why Vanjan is going to such trouble. Vanjan explains that Muhin asked him to do it. He says Muhin told him to wait at the university so Senju wouldn't leave on his own and that he'd get in touch later. Senju's friend asks if he knows Vanjan. Senju says they went to the same school. The friend asks if that means they're friends. Senju asks if it looked like they were friends when he gave him his number. The friend asks why Vanjan suddenly needed him then, and why he's insisting on walking him home. Senju doesn't know how to explain or where to start. Even if he begins talking about spiritual energy and everything else, would they even understand? Sojun asks if this is the same Heian they saw before, the one with the neck tattoo. Senju says whatever they're imagining, it's not true. He tells them to stop making a big deal out of nothing and just eat. He himself wouldn't mind asking Muhin what his reasoning was. Muhin didn't come personally and even sent Vanjan to escort him. Couldn't he have at least given him a heads up? Senju decides he'll have to ask Vanjan directly. He's not thrilled about it, but at least he'll learn something. Senju realizes he didn't get Vanjan's number. He thinks Vanjan could have at least sent him a polite text. How could they make plans without contacting him until the end of class? Did he forget? Senju waits outside in the cold, thinking he could already be home by now. Why wait an hour just to walk for another 30 minutes with someone? If he took the bus, he could be home in 10 minutes. And without spiritual energy, there's no real need for this. He could contact Muhin directly and ask him, but what would he even say? Why didn't he come himself? Why didn't he reach out? Did he know Senju's spiritual vision would disappear and decide not to come because of that? Or why doesn't he take responsibility if it's his fault? It wouldn't be hard to come up with an excuse to call, but he doesn't want to reveal his foolish thoughts. After all, he's not a child. He decides to just wait and meet Vanjan. He figures Vanjan is probably in the business building, considering his department. Someone seems to be watching him. He wonders when the class will end and feels the cold creeping in, wishing he could find a warm spot. Suddenly, a stranger approaches and asks if he's Senju. Senju wonders who this guy is and when he became so popular. He asks who the stranger is, thinking he doesn't look like a scammer, but why would he know his name? Out of nowhere, the stranger asks for Senju's number. Senju thinks, who is this idiot? Is today some kind of special occasion? Did this comedian take inspiration from Vanjan to mess with me? He asks the stranger what he wants. The guy says he just wants to be friends. The stranger pulls out his phone and asks for his number again. Senju thinks he must be a lunatic and decides to leave before anything crazy happens. As Senju walks away, the stranger chases after him, asking where he's going and reminding him he asked for his number. Senju asks who said he'd give it to him. The stranger asks why not. Senju, now angry, asks if he's seriously asking that and what he even wants from him. Senju says he doesn't even know him, asks who would give their number to a random stranger, and demands to know how he learned his name. The stranger falls silent, and Senju notes that his expression doesn't seem entirely human. Despite this, he still feels it's best not to engage with him. All he wants now is for the stranger to leave him alone. The stranger asks him to stop, but suddenly, Senju feels that strange sensation again. He wonders if the stranger is a spirit. Senju remembers that his spiritual energy is gone, but pulls out his talisman anyway. He thinks a spirit can't just appear out of nowhere. The stranger notices Senju's unease and asks what's wrong. Senju observes that the stranger's expression is oddly lifeless. Unsure of what to do, he wonders if he should call Muhin. Suddenly, his phone rings and he answers quickly. On the other end, Vanjan asks where he is. Senju says he's outside the humanities building. For the first time in his life, he feels genuinely relieved to hear from Vanjan. He remembers that Vanjan is also an exorcist and thinks his arrival might resolve the situation. He tells him there's a spirit nearby. At these words, the spirit suddenly disappears. Vanjan approaches Senju, noticing his bewildered expression, and asks what's wrong. Senju explains that he just encountered a spirit. Vanjan asks if he's feeling unwell. Senju replies that he might be hallucinating. Vanjan asks if he's ever seen spirits like this before. Senju tries to explain everything. He debates how to tell him that he saw spirits thanks to his spiritual vision. Instead, he tells Vanjan to forget what he said, thinking that if he explained everything, Vanjan would figure out how he gained spiritual energy. Senju tells Hwanjeon that if he takes someone's number, he should at least send a text. Hwanjeon asks how else he was supposed to get in touch. Hwanjeon asks what he meant when he mentioned the spirit. Senju asks why he's suddenly interested now. He explains that a stranger approached him earlier, asking for his number, and his expression seemed lifeless. He tried to get away, but the stranger disappeared without a trace while they were talking on the phone. Hwanjeon asks if he gave the stranger his number. Senju asks if he would have done that in his place. Hwanjeon remarks that spirits usually don't appear at this time, but even if they did, Senju wouldn't be able to see them. Senju thinks Hwanjeon's calm tone makes him instinctively want to believe him. Senju hopes he never sees that stranger again. As Hwanjeon walks Senju home, Senju asks what exactly Muhin requested of him. Hwanjeon explains that Muhin asked him to escort Senju home and make sure he was all right. Hwanjeon adds that Muhin wanted to ask Merjeon to do it, but since Merjeon was asleep, he stepped in. That's why he asked if Senju wasn't feeling well earlier. Senju realizes that Muhin didn't tell him anything beyond that. Of course, he wouldn't go into details, but why did he ask Hwanjeon to do it? He could have come himself. Suddenly, Hwanjeon asks if Senju didn't know that Muhin was injured during his last job. Senju can't believe it. Hunting spirits is dangerous, but Muhin usually doesn't make mistakes. Hwanjeon says Muhin couldn't come personally, so he asked them to step in. Senju asks if it's that serious. Hwanjeon says he doesn't know the details, only that Muhin apparently fell from a cliff, but Merjeon said he was fine. Senju thinks no one could be fine after falling from such a height. Do exorcists have a different definition of the word? Not a single word from Muhin all morning, and now this. Hwanjeon suggests that if he's worried, he should call Muhin. Logically, if Muhin were seriously injured, Merjeon wouldn't have been calmly sleeping until noon, and Senju would have been informed. Still, he wants to see with his own eyes that Muhin is all right. He stands outside Muhin's house, feeling uneasy. He came here, but getting inside is another matter. The security is far too strict. It's his second time here, but he doesn't remember how he entered the first time. Leaving just like that isn't an option. He decides to call Muhin once, and if he doesn't pick up, he'll leave. Maybe Muhin is sleeping. Senju thinks he'll hang up after a few more rings. But suddenly he hears a response. Senju thinks that Muhin's voice sounds tired. It usually has a different tone. When Muhin realizes it's Senju, his tone immediately shifts back to its usual warmth. Senju says he's here, standing in front of his house. As he stands at Muhin's apartment door, Senju wonders if it would be better to just turn around and leave. He hopes that even if he sees with his own eyes how serious Muhin's injuries are, it won't affect him too deeply. When Muhin opens the door, Senju apologizes for coming without warning. Muhin says it doesn't matter and asks if he's alone. Senju recalls that Muhin even assigned Hwanjeon to him and wonders if he's upset that he came unaccompanied. He tells Muhin that his spiritual vision is gone. Muhin looks at him and confirms that it truly is. Senju realizes that the man he saw earlier wasn't a spirit, but a person, though this doesn't make him feel any better. Muhin suggests they start by coming inside and takes his hand. Senju wonders why Muhin is so impulsive today. He thinks he hadn't planned on staying long. He feels the warmth of Muhin's hands. They were cold before, so perhaps the spiritual energy really has disappeared. Senju mentions that he noticed Muhin is injured. He sees a bandage on Muhin's arm. Muhin asks if Hwanjeon told him about it. Judging by Muhin's expression, Senju thinks he hadn't planned on mentioning it. Senju asks if it's serious. Muhin says it's just a dislocated shoulder and reassures him not to worry. He adjusted it quickly, and the bandage is just for precaution. Senju knows that exorcists are far more resilient than ordinary people. Even a broken bone heals in just a week. No wonder everyone thinks he's fine. Muhin asks if Senju was worried about him. He strokes Senju's cheek, and Senju admits that he was worried and came to check on him. Senju thinks Muhin looks so sleepy and relaxed, as if he'd accept anything Senju might say. Senju feels like Muhin might pull some kind of trick any moment and decides it's time to leave. He tells Muhin that if he's all right, he'll head out and that Muhin should get some rest. Muhin grabs his hand and asks if he's leaving already. Senju says there's no reason for him to stay any longer. Suddenly, Muhin asks him to stay for dinner. Senju says he's not hungry, but Muhin insists. Muhin asks him to spend a little time with his Hyeon. Now, Muhin is preparing dinner. In the end, Senju decides to stay for the meal. Senju says he'll just eat and leave. Muhin asks what they'll do after dinner and jokes that they still have ice cream waiting. Senju asks how Muhin even has ice cream, considering he doesn't eat sweets. Muhin says he bought it just for him. Senju thinks Muhin is acting like a child and that he should just go to bed. Muhin calls him to the table. Senju thinks he'll eat and leave immediately afterward. Looking at the food, Senju comments that Muhin is a really good cook. Muhin thanks him for the compliment. Muhin adds that after all, he's been living on his own for 10 years. After dinner, Senju notices that it's already close to 9 o'clock. He says it's time for him to leave, but Muhin says he'll walk him home. Senju says it's unnecessary since he lives close by. Muhin replies that it's late and dangerous outside, and if possible, it's better not to walk alone. Senju points out that he managed to get to university on his own in the morning. Suddenly, Muhin apologizes. Muhin says in that case, Senju has two choices: either stay the night or let him walk him home. He hands Senju his coat and asks where he plans to go without it. Outside, Senju asks if Muhin gets injured often. Muhin says not really. Otherwise, he wouldn't still be an exorcist. He explains that a lack of sleep and the strain of using a talisman extensively took their toll. Senju asks how many days he'd been working. Muhin says he started on Friday, so about 3 days. He needed to seal a spirit before it grew stronger, but no matter how much he searched, he couldn't find it. Senju tells him he should get some sleep and asks if he's still working tonight. From Muhin's smile, Senju can tell that he is. He wonders what an exhausted man with an injured arm plans to do. His head begins to spin. Senju had been feeling uneasy all morning. First, he learned about Muhin's injury, and now he's walking him home. Senju says that last time he sensed something even Muhin didn't detect. He wonders if he might be able to attract the spirit. Muhin asks if he's suggesting using himself as bait. Senju says that's not exactly what he meant, but adds that it doesn't matter. Normally, he wouldn't suggest it, but today, Muhin looks especially tired. He says he hopes Muhin catches the spirit quickly so he can finally rest. Senju wants to ask him something, but before he can, Muhin kisses him. Senju thinks that the New Year's kiss had been different. He had never kissed like this before or dared to try. Even the day he woke up in Muhin's bed, he hadn't imagined such a kiss from him. He feels something strange in his stomach and notices he's cold. Muhin thanks him for the offer, but says that if he truly wants to help, he'll need to do it every day. Senju wonders if they kissed like this the last time he blacked out. Muhin tells him to just look at himself and asks what good it would do. He tells Senju to go home and says goodbye until tomorrow. Senju thinks he doesn't even know if he'll be able to sleep peacefully tonight. That night, he has a dream. It takes place in a familiar apartment. He's there with Muhin. He wants to say something to him, but immediately forgets what it was. Muhin asks why Senju addresses him that way in his thoughts. He asks him to call him Hyun. Senju asks why he's pretending not to remember what happened between them. Muhin replies that it wasn't a kiss. Senju wonders why. Not only had it been a kiss, but it was unmistakable. He laughs and asks what else it could have been. Muhin says he couldn't possibly do such a thing with their Senju. Senju asks if he's sure about that and kisses Muhin. In the morning, Senju wakes up startled from the dream. He can't figure out what the dream meant or why he and Muhin were doing such things. He thinks it would have been better to keep living in ignorance. Why do memories long buried in the depths of his mind resurface? As Muhin once said, memory is like a chain. Even a small hint of the past can unleash a flood of recollections like a breached dam. Sometimes, even memories you wish to forget forever come rushing back. Yet, an experience so vivid is impossible to erase. Why couldn't he see the dream through to the end? He spent the whole night tossing and turning, and as a result, he nearly overslept. Outside, Muhin greets him and asks if he slept well. Judging by Senju's silence, Muhin concludes that he probably didn't. Senju asks who's to blame for that, thinking that Muhin seems to have forgotten yesterday. Senju asks if he caught the spirit. Muhin says not yet. Senju tells him to put in more effort. Muhin says he's so kind for supporting his Hyeon. Senju thinks this isn't support. He meant that Muhin should handle it himself. Muhin says he won't disappear for the entire week again. He adds that he hopes Senju isn't upset. Senju asks if he seems upset. Muhin says not at all, and Senju wonders why he even asked. Senju says he's not upset, though he thinks his past self might have been. He feels like that kiss meant rejection. Senju reflects on how Muhin walks him to university, even though it's close, and how he wouldn't let him go out alone at night. He asks if there's anything he can do to help. He wonders if Muhin has guessed his intention to offer himself as bait. It's easy to see how it might look that way. But the decision was deliberate. He dislikes getting hurt or taking risks. In moments of danger, Muhin is always by his side. That's why he's confident that nothing will happen to him. Bait. He wishes it didn't sound so frightening, but he hadn't expected such a rejection from Muhin. He thinks, damn it, who's really suffering from lack of sleep here, me or Muhin? Once Senju makes a decision, no one can talk him out of it. At the cafeteria, his friend suggests Senju take just a couple of drags from his cigarette before they leave. He says they have time before the next lecture. Senju tells him to smoke and come back. He's going ahead. His friend says that Senju has no sense of loyalty. Senju tells him to drop the topic and says they'll see each other in the lecture hall. He thinks Jin is a good guy, but he smokes way too much. That's why Muhin can smell it even from a distance. He recalls that his next class is in the humanities building. Suddenly, a stranger approaches him. Senju wonders if it's that same spirit-like guy. He thinks, was he waiting for me? The guy greets him. Senju realizes that the stranger isn't a spirit, though he does resemble one. He doesn't reply to the greeting, and the guy repeats, hello? Senju asks what he wants from him and why he's here again. He thinks, you can't just walk up to a stranger and say hi. The guy says it's polite to respond to greetings. Senju thinks it would be better if the guy didn't act as though he lacked common sense, because he clearly does.